Page 166, the last section. Those who wish to seek out the causes of miracles and understand the things of nature as philosophers, and not to stare at them in astonishment like fools, are soon considered heretical and impious, and proclaimed such by those whom the mob adore as the interpreters of nature and the gods. For these men know that once ignorance is put aside, that wonderment would be taken away, which is the only means by which their authority is preserved. The culminating experience came shortly after the excommunication. One night, as Spinoza was walking through the streets, a pious ruffian, bent on demonstrating his theology by murder, attacked the young student with drawn dagger. Spinoza, turning quickly, escaped with a slight wound on the neck, concluding that there are few places in this world where it is safe to be a philosopher. He went to live in quiet attic room on the outer deck road outside of Amsterdam. It was now probably that he changed his name from Barak to Benedict. His host and hostess were Christians of the Mennonite sect, and could in some measure understand a heretic. They liked his sadly kind face. Those who have suffered much become very bitter or very gentle, and were delighted when occasionally he would come down of an evening, smoke his pipe with them, and tune his talk to their simple strain. He made his line at first by teaching children, invent and underschooled, and then by polishing lenses, as if he had an inclination for dealing with refractory material. He had learned the optical trade while living in the Jewish community. It was in accord with Hebrew canon that every student should acquire some manual art, not only because study and honest teaching can seldom make a livelihood, but as Gamaliel had said, work keeps one virtuous, whereas every learned man who fails to acquire a trade will at last turn out a rogue. Five years later, 1660, his host moved to Rheinsberg, near Leyden, and Spinoza moved with him. The house still stands, and the road bears the philosopher's name. These were years of plain living and high thinking. Many times he stayed in his room for 2 or 3 days together, seeing nobody, and having his modest meals brought up to him. The lenses were well done, but not so continuously as to earn for Spinoza more than merely enough. He loved wisdom too much to be a successful man. Scholars who followed Spinoza in these logins and wrote a short life of this philosopher from the reports of those who had known him, says he was very careful to cast up his accounts every quarter, which he did that he might spend neither more nor less than what he had to spend for each year. And he would say sometimes to the people of the house that he was like the serpent who forms a circle with his tail in his mouth, to denote that he had nothing left at the year's end. But in his modest way he was happy. To one who advised him to trust in revelation rather than in reason, he answered, "Though I were at times to find the fruit unreal which I gather by my natural understanding, yet this would not make me otherwise than content, because in the gathering I am happy, and pass my days not in sighing and sorrow, but in peace, serenity, and joy." If Napoleon had been as intelligent as Spinoza says, a great sage, he would have lived in a garret and written 4 books. To the portraits of Spinoza which have come down to us, we may add a word of description from Durant. He was of a middle size. He had good features in his face, the skin somewhat black, the hair dark and curly, the eyebrows long and black, so that one might easily know by his looks that he was descended from Portuguese Jews. As for his clothes, he was very careless of them, and they were not better than those of the meanest citizen. One of the most eminent councillors of state went to see him, and found him in a very untidy morning gown, whereupon the councillor reproached him for it, and offered him another. Spinoza answered that a man was never the better for having a fine gown, and added, "It is unreasonable to wrap up things of little or no value in a precious cover." Spinoza's sartorial philosophy was not always so ascetic. It is not a disorderly or slovenly carriage that makes us sages. He writes, for affected indifference to personal appearance is rather evidence of a poor spirit in which true wisdom could find no worthy dwelling place, and the science could only meet with disorder and disarray. It was during these 5 years' stay at Rheinsberg that Spinoza wrote the little fragment on the improvement of the intellect, the intellectus emendation, and the ethics geometrically demonstrated. Ethica more geometrical demonstrata. The latter was finished in 1665, but for 10 years Spinoza made no effort to publish it. In 1668, Durant Kohlberg, for printing opinions similar to Spinoza's, was sent to jail for 10 years and died there after serving 18 months of his sentence. When, in 1675, Spinoza went to Amsterdam, trusting that he might now safely publish his chef d'oeuvre, a rumor was spread about, as he writes to his friend Oldenburg, that a book of mine was soon to appear, in which I endeavored to prove that there is no God. This report, I regret to add, was by many received as true. Certain theologians, who probably were themselves the author of the rumor, took occasion upon this to lodge a complaint against me with the prince and the magistrates. Having received a hint of this state of things from some trustworthy friends, who assured me further that the theologians were everywhere lying in wait for me, I determined to put off my attempted publication until such time as I should see what turn affairs would take. Only after Spinoza's death did the Ethics appear, 1677, along with an unfinished treatise on politics, Tractatus Politicus, and a treatise on the rainbow. All these works were in Latin, as the universal language of European philosophy and science in the 17th century. A short treatise on God and man, written in Dutch, was discovered by Van Roten in 1852. It was apparently a preparatory sketch for the Ethics, the only books published by Spinoza in his lifetime were the Principles of the Cartesian Philosophy, 1663, and a treatise on religion and the state, Tractatus Theologico Politicus, which appeared anonymously in 1670. It was at once honored with a place in the Index purgatorious, and its sale was prohibited by the civil authorities. With this assistance, it attained to a consideration circulation under cover of title pages, which disguised it as a medical treatise or an historical narrative. Countless volumes were written to refute it. One called Spinoza the most impious atheist that ever lived upon the face of the earth. Carolus speaks of another reputation as a treasure of infinite value, which shall never perish. Only this notice remains of it. In addition to such public chastisement, Spinoza received a number of letters intended to reform him, that of a former pupil, Albert Berg, who had been converted to Catholicism, may be taken as a sample. You assume that you have at last found the true philosophy. How do you know that your philosophy is the best of all those which have ever been taught in the world, are now taught, or shall be taught hereafter? To say nothing of what may be devised in the future. Have you examined all those philosophies, both ancient and modern, which are taught here in India and all the world over? And even supposing that you have duly examined them, how do you know that you have chosen the best? How dare you set yourself up above all the patriarchs, prophets, apostles, martyrs, youths, doctors, and confessors of the church, miserable man and worm upon the earth that you are, yea, ashes and food for worms? How can you confront the eternal wisdom with your unspeakable blasphemy? What foundation have you for this rash, insane, deplorable, accursed doctrine? What devilish pride puffs you up to pass judgment on mysteries which Catholics themselves declare to be incomprehensible, etc., etc.? To which Spinoza replied, you who assume that you have at last found the best religion, or rather the best teachers, and fixed your credulity upon them, how do you know that they are the best among those who have taught religions? or now teach, or shall hereafter teach them. Have you examined all those religions, ancient and modern, which are taught here and in India and all the world over, and even supposing that you have duly examined them, how do you know that you have chosen the best? Apparently, the gentle philosopher could be firm enough when occasion called for it. Not all the letters were of this uncomfortable kind. Many of them were from men of nature, of mature culture and high position. Most prominent of these correspondents were Henry Oldenburg, Secretary of the recently established Royal Science of England, von Schinschhouse, a young German inventor, and a nobleman, Huygens, the Dutch scientist, Leibniz, the philosopher, who visited Spinoza in 1676, Louis Meer, a physician of the Hague, and Simon de Vries, a rich merchant of Amsterdam. The latter so admired Spinoza that he begged him to accept a gift of 1,000. Spinoza refused, and later, when de Vries, making his will, proposed to leave his entire fortune to him, Spinoza persuaded de Vries instead of bequeathed his wealth to his brother. When the merchant died, it was found that he required that an annuity of 250 should be paid to Spinoza out of the income of the property. Spinoza wished again to refuse, saying, "Nature is satisfied with little, and if she is, I am also." But he was at last prevailed upon to accept 150 a year. Another friend, Jan de Witt, chief magistrate of the Dutch Republic, gave him a state annuity of 50. Finally, the Grand Monarch himself, Louis XIV, offered him a substantial pension, with the implied condition that Spinoza should dedicate his next book to the king. Spinoza courteously declined. To please his friends and correspondents, Spinoza moved to Woburg, a suburb of the Hague, in 1665 and 1670 to the Hague itself. During these later years, he developed an affectionate intimacy with Jan de Witt, and when de Witt and his brother were murdered in the streets by a mob which believed them responsible for the defeat of the Dutch troops by the French in 1672, Spinoza, on being apprised of the infamy, burst into tears, and but for the force which was used to restrain him, would have sallied forth a second Anthony to denounce the crime on the spot where it had been committed. Not long afterward, the Prince de Conde, head of the invading French army, invited Spinoza to his headquarters to convey to him the offer of a royal pension from France and to introduce certain admirers of Spinoza who were with the prince. Spinoza, who seems to have been rather a good European than a nationalist, thought it nothing strange for him to cross the lines and go to Conde's camp. When he returned to The Hague, the news of his visit spread about, and there were angry murmurs among the people. Spinoza's host, Van de Spijk, was in fear of an attack upon his house, but Spinoza calmed him, saying, "I can easily clear myself of all suspicion of treason, but should the people show the slightest disposition to molest you, should they even assemble and make a noise before your house, I will go down to them, though they should serve me as they did poor DeWitt." But when the crowd learned that Spinoza was merely a philosopher, they concluded that he must be harmless, and the commotion quieted down. Spinoza's life, as we see it in this little instant, was not as impoverished and secluded as it has been traditionally pictured. He had some degree of economic security. He had influential and congenial friends. He took an interest in the political issues of his time, and he was not without